those days where I feel like I'm on a little bit of a delay. So bear with me for a second, and I will get to drawing momentarily. I'll give it a minute, see if anyone gets in here before I start. Although I save all these for the archive, I do like to cater to the live crowd in case people are watching. I need to go back and count again. I think I've lost count, but we're somewhere in the high 20s of days in a row of drawing at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which means California time. And we have until, got about 6 or 7 more days of drawing at that time. Then it's going to change up a little bit when I start traveling again. Just going to move a few things out of my way here. Kind of having another Jeff Goldblum moment where I am sitting by myself, talking to myself. Little Jurassic Park reference. Okay, well, seems like it's going to be one of those slow start days. So. And like I've said on all the other ones, I tend to not talk about art while I'm drawing. But if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. As long as they're nice, I will be nice. And away we go. Cool, right on. I'm answering, for the sake of the archive, for anyone who's wondering, my usual chat folks is saying that they'll be watching, but they can't hear me. So. There you go, Travis. All right. All right. Almost 5 minutes in, now we're going to start drawing. put up a few slightly longer time lapses today so people can watch the drawing process in less than 3 hours but more than 10 seconds, in case you're interested in that, so you can see a little bit more of the progression. Not really sure what people are interested in terms of drawing material in reference to process videos. I know some people have asked for tutorials on how to draw noses, which I will do. I might actually do that just using the footage of what I've drawn already, so I can just do some voiceover. Right on. Thanks for watching, man. That sounds like it's going to be a good show. I mean, 1,200 is already a lot of people. So this reference photo is a little bit softer than what I would normally use to draw with, but in terms of framing and proximity to my lens to his face, it was the one that I preferred. So I'm going to kind of balance that where you see that reflect in the drawing itself. I watched some other live streams today, which I don't often do. There's a few people that I've followed for a long time, and I'll watch their streams, but just kind of getting an idea of like what interaction most folks have. My takeaway is so far I'm lucky to have a few regulars that are cool, but it seems like in a lot of live streams in general, once it gets over a certain number, it's kind of like the chat gets a little too diluted with spam and bots and trolls and things like that, which is kind of a shame. So eventually I may have to set up some more community guidelines, but fortunately I've only had a couple sort of sour moments, but I don't know. More than dipping in and out of the chat, I like when people give prompts of things to talk about, but at the same time I prefer to kind of ramble and talk about whatever's going on. Sort of like day in the life with me as I'm drawing, which speaking of, I did not run today, which I usually mention towards the beginning of these. Got like a little strained muscle situation going on, which I feel it energy-wise. I always feel better when I've run, but especially right before travel, the last thing I want to do is be injured. I also had such a weird day yesterday, just interacting with people, so I felt a little bit like staying in and working on other stuff. Honestly, without really intending to, I was watching a movie that has Bernthal in it earlier and completely forgot that he played a character in it. Which I think is more telling of the fact that I rewatch a lot of movies instead of that he's in a ton of things. And I think it's kind of maybe telling of the times, but yesterday I talked a good deal about just sort of like social etiquette, especially around the city, more specifically to San Francisco where I live, and some like odd interactions I had. Even after I was done drawing last night, I had more weird interactions just going, like running to the store. Really is starting to make me second guess how much I want to live here. Weather and scenery kind of didn't do it enough for me. On top of the constant neighbor noise, which right now, I guess it's comical in some ways, but our upstairs neighbor is a beginner musician, which more power to him. I love that for people, especially if they really enjoy it, but please don't practice Oasis songs at 3 in the morning. I used to teach guitar when I was younger, and it's kind of maddening to hear someone really poorly power through a song rather than fixing the parts that they kind of half know, which he also does with keyboard, and you'd think that that wouldn't bother us, but I think his stand is on the floor directly above the bedroom, so I can hear him really poorly playing the same 3 songs over and over, which has been going on for a year and a half. And at my age, I think I've used up all the patience units that I'm allotted for neighbor noise like that. I think I might honestly prefer hearing someone mow their yard or constant dog barking or something over beginner Wonderwall practice at 3 in the morning. I think like everything, there's always a time and place. But fortunately, we haven't had our gamer neighbor yelling all day today, so that was a little bit of a reprieve. Which, for the handful of people that are on here, if you're listening, I've talked about it at length. We have some pretty loud neighbors in general, but they all kind of have their own brand of loudness. And the gamer guys, I think, mostly playing Call of Duty or something along those lines from how he's yelling. But he wears headphones and then yells out of his window all day. And when I say all day, I mean from the moment he wakes up until, 2 in the morning. And it's loud. It's like right across a concrete alley from us, between buildings. So it kind of wears on me, which usually I have to gauge when I'm drawing with the window open like I am right now, according to his noise. The neighbors downstairs, the neighbor upstairs. Still kind of convinced the neighbor upstairs may not have knees, because he walks like he's just constantly on the heels of his feet. Usually in what I have set up as my little office art studio, his directly above ours, I'm pretty sure the only way that he puts things down in here is he throws them. So it's usually abrupt and at random, and kind of has like a car crash element to it. So I'd say I could ignore it, but honestly I can't. And that's coming from someone that's mostly deaf in one ear. It's still loud enough to annoy me. And then I think we have new neighbors across the way, because there's a lady that pretty much all day long is having phone calls on speakerphone. She's the one that was yelling about the grocery store not putting her pepper back in her bag a few days ago, which we could hear pretty audibly on the live stream. Actually, you can hear a little bit of her right now. Eventually, I'll plug everything into OBS and put a condenser mic on my paper, just slightly off screen, so that way we'll be able to hear more of the drawing noise without having to hear all the loud neighbors, which is mostly why I talk through these now, because I can't really list these as ASMR with the inconsistency in noise control. And a couple days ago I had 18 minutes of just almost pure silence, and it was just pencil and paper. It was really nice, but then downstairs they started doing dishes, and I assume they're doing them from across the room, meaning they're throwing them into the sink, because it's astonishingly loud. For the few folks that are watching, if you do have any questions about art, I'm happy to answer, but like I said earlier, I'd rather not talk about art while I'm making it. If you can hear those birds, those are the San Francisco parrots. that plane, if you can hear it, I'm pretty sure that's the seaplane that takes off and lands at Sausalito, like in a little marina there. If you're unfamiliar with the Bay Area, Sausalito is just north of Golden Gate Bridge, and all day long that seaplane takes off and lands. Which, if you're sitting in the right place, it's actually kind of nice. And they do a big loop around the city and then go back. Just something that, when we were in Italy last time, I really enjoyed. There were 2 seaplanes that landed on the lake over and over, and that's all they did all day, just ferrying people from Como to villages that are up north. From the right distance, it's kind of peaceful. I notice people tend to dip out of here when I talk, but y'all can kick rocks. I'm happier to talk and draw than to sit in silence. Not sure if you can hear it, but occasionally there's a really loud car. And I never really get that in San Francisco. There's so many hills and stoplights. You're essentially just cruising around having to slam on the brakes really hard. How's it going, Joby? It's probably less audible now, but I can still hear him essentially slamming the gas and then having to slam on the brakes at every red light. What's the point in having a fast car if you gotta do that? And take it out somewhere else. Nice. Oh, see, yeah, if you can hear now, there's the seaplane again. So that is it, because they're making a loop over the city and then going back. Oh, what's up, Nolan? I'm assuming they're baby ducks then. Nice. How many did you get? Oh, cool. That's not too much. I feel like if you get more than that, it's kind of a handful of work. I have a friend in Louisiana that I've mentioned who has a small farm, and I feel like every time I go out there, she's got more and more birds because she has geese and 4 different types of chickens. And it's kind of funny because it's most of the farm noise out there is all birds. But they're all pretty full of character, lots of personality. Yeah, other than like occasional cow noise and the horse sort of pacing around, and there's a really large corral or the field. It's just all bird noise out there, which after a while is kind of peaceful. Oh, nice. Well, hopefully ducks like art. There's also goats on that farm. Rabbits. I mean, she has all kinds of stuff. But the last time I was there were a couple new baby goats, and she was at the point where she had so many chickens she was having to like sell them and give some away. It's like a nice little haven out there in southern Louisiana. Speaking of ducks, it's been a while ago, but I was on a walk in the Presidio, which is kind of like a big green belt and a neighborhood in San Francisco, and was trying to feed some of the ducks with my kid, and there's one that just seemed like kind of a jerk, just being like really aggressive with everybody, but like wanting food, and he bit my hand, and it's one of the weirdest feelings I've ever had because their bill feels like completely hollow, like tree bark almost, like hollow tree bark. But once he did that, I didn't want to give him anything, and they followed us around for a long time. It was kind of funny. And speaking of, I was talking about the seaplane that was taking off and landing here, and the similarities to that, to the seaplanes that are in Lake Como. There's these stone steps that walk down to the water, and there's a white duck with a red and orange bill that just like walks up and hangs out with everybody on those steps. And got a couple good photos of him. Maybe I should draw him. I realized after signing off yesterday that I got sidetracked while I was talking about the Blackwing pencils. I didn't really finish that thought. As much as I like them, like I've had a couple people ask in the last few weeks about them. I like drawing with them. I like the shape of the eraser for long grip, like on my hand right here. But so far my experience with them is that oh cool. They're not really worth the price point. For a box of 12, it's like $35 plus shipping. And something that I don't like, and this is also from being a little bit in that business, like the shop that I've mentioned on some of these streams that I used to work in. We sold nice drawing materials and writing materials and stuff like that, which is kind of why I was attracted to work in there. A discount on stuff I'd get anyway. When there's like a heavily impersonal element to a product that's billed as like a small company and like someone who's chasing quality over like high sales, I feel like that's sort of where Blackwing falls apart. They talk about their products like they're historic, which they are to an extent. But this is a company that's been restarted after purchasing, to my understanding, for purchasing the namesake of it. And then they're recreating an old product and kind of taking the story of that product, even though it's completely different. And I don't know, with stuff like that, I think it's a little weird, but also I've interacted with them a little bit, and they're kind of like too obviously just trying to capitalize on the brand more than really like creating a product that artists are really into. And they've created a product that I'd say your average artist, if they're drawing frequently, probably wouldn't invest in. But I also, I've done a lot of drawings with these pencils, and I've, tagged them in a lot of stuff. I've messaged a little bit with them. And it's not that they're not responsive, it's sort of how they respond that I don't like, where it's almost like copy-paste, like an intern's doing it. And I feel like your market as artists, you should interface with them a little better. And then the things that they do post or repost seem to be more like influencer type stuff, which is something I really detest. It's also, in talking about that job that I left a while ago, that was one of the big catalysts for me to leave, was that I put in a lot of time with their products and made a lot of videos and took a lot of photos and was pretty instrumental in training a lot of folks there and getting people to kind of like appreciate more than just the brand's sake. And then they were putting together a social media team, and I have a lot of experience with that in terms of band marketing and just creating things that are less standard. So it's not just all same like TikTok trends and stuff like that. And they told me that they didn't have the bandwidth or budget for it. Then they hired inexperienced people and took all the ideas that I'd suggested and have kind of run with them. And I think sort of like the final nail in it for me was that there's a photographer, Take Ko, that I've followed for a long time and had a dialogue with for a long time. And he posted, and he always has a lot of cool journal stuff and pens, and he's another Leica photographer and also into Fuji, which are the two brands that I use. And he posted he was looking for an everyday carry brass ballpoint pen that wasn't Kaweco, which is sort of like my wheelhouse. That's what I've kind of specialized in, and I've suggested a pen that the company I work for made, and found out that we couldn't ship it to him because he's in Canada. And so got together with the manager of our store, and we personally paid for the shipping and sent him a little care package. And this is a guy who has, you know, between all of his accounts, upwards of 100K in followers. I'd say like most of his crowd are people that, I don't know, I wouldn't say he's like, he's a guy that's like chasing numbers. He's more so someone that's chasing quality. And it's sort of why I've maintained a dialogue with him for a long time. And he wrote me after he got it and said that the company wouldn't let him tag them in anything. And so I messaged our social media manager for that company, and she was like, oh yeah, we're not going to be able to change that. And so this guy, who is an international traveler who splits his time between Canada and Japan, which is kind of funny because our company was Japanese owned, and they're part of like the Japanese American Society here, and they're really big on that. I explained all that. I also explained that he and his dad, who's also an artist, grew up going to Itoya, the parent company that started the company we worked for, and they were obsessed with it. And they were like, no, it's not really our style, we're not going to do that. So I ended up getting like a whole care package of things just on the house, basically. And they didn't reciprocate at all. And then they gave these people that they considered influencers a bunch of care packages. And that went nowhere. And so then they just deemed that social media didn't work, which was kind of funny. And it reminds me of that situation. And then now when I see them post, it's always stuff that I suggested a couple of years ago, like not general ideas, very specific ideas with no accreditation or any personality to it. And it really, going back to Blackwing, it really reminds me of that thing where they create something that feels really custom, and then they sort of don't reciprocate or work with any of the people that would make it feel that way, or that would appreciate how custom it actually is. It's just sort of this impersonal element of something where it really is truly just commerce. And it's something that I really detest, is art and commerce being too intertwined. You know, and I say that as someone that made a living, you know, doing art and commerce, because, you know, playing music for a living. But when it comes to going back to like materials like Blackwings, their whole market is artists. You know, I don't know that anyone's going to get these just specifically to write with. And I mean, maybe somebody will, so that's cool. But all the videos they repost are people drawing, and then you get kind of these like automated messages in return, which to me just feels, I don't know, it's like cold, like no personality, no appreciation for the people that actually use them. But that mixed with the price point, it just makes me feel like I just have to get over not liking that element of that business, you know. And of course, that's all just from like based on my experience with these companies. A good example is like the journals that I use and the sketchbooks. They're made by Paper Republic, and it's a company out of Vienna and Paris. And I'll admit they've gotten a little less personal in the last year or so, but my relationship with that company is very different. The owner and the head of their marketing liked my drawings and how much I was really a big advocate for using their journal system, because you can carry both a journal and sketchbooks in one thing and not have to carry multiple books. It's the journals that it's what I'm drawing in right now, just the large portfolio version. They liked what I was doing with them so much that they sent me this portfolio for free, which, like, to give you an idea of what I mean, for the refill I'm drawing in, this is a $50 or $60 sketchbook, and the portfolio itself is $300, and they sent it to me just as a way of saying they appreciate how much I cared about their brand. And when I talked to the owner, Jerome, he's a French guy that lives in Austria, or I think he splits his time between Vienna and Paris. He told me he created the company just because he got tired of people having poor quality paper and notebooks. And then told me that if he's going to create something or invest in something, he just wants to be something out of passion and not out of like commerce, which is cool. I think it reflects like really well on how they treat all their products and their customers. Excuse me. I think they've gotten a little bit bigger than they ever intended to be, though, so it's kind of gotten more sparse, where occasionally I'll get messages from them. And they're really good about kind of promoting artists that are loyal to their brand. It's something that I see a great deal, though, being in music and in art and photography. A lot of people target just to make money. They're just trying to make a buck off of people that are willing to use their stuff. There's kind of a lack of passion in it. And I feel like that starts to translate really poorly over time. But I'd say, going back to what the original thought was, I think if you like them, get them, but I don't know that these pencils are really worth or can back up the story that they sell them with. Because their whole claim is that like Steinbeck used the black series and he'd buy 2 boxes and sharpen both of them entirely, so by the time he was needing to sharpen all of the pencils again, he would take a writing break. I just feel like, how do you know that? How can you corroborate that story? Same thing as like if you look in the sort of liner notes of a Moleskine, they talk about all the great artists that have used them over the years and how they always had them on them, and I feel like that might be true to some extent. But I don't think anybody is truly like, I'm a Moleskine man and that's all they use. I have Moleskines, but I also have a bunch of stuff. Basically, I'm just salty today about people poorly handling companies that target artists and creatives as their market with like high price stuff, when most creatives are not really making a ton of money on what they do on the whole. I think that's also like a largely American thing, even though some of these companies I've talked about aren't necessarily based in America. The Blackwing is actually based in like north of the Bay where we live. And I've got to say, every company, because I did used to work at a location up there, every company had like the same kind of owner, where they're kind of sleazy and it was like their 9th business and they're just kind of in and out. It's just purely a profit thing. Which, like, I get it, everything is basically about profit here, but I don't know, it just makes me wish there were more like of a art or creative based or a passion based business that produced all these things, made it more affordable for people. But it goes that way no matter what. It's the same as the music industry was. I mean, half the time when I was in bands, the number one thing you'd hear is you're getting let go from a label, or someone's telling you that they're not going to work with you anymore. They usually say, we're not sure how to market your product, meaning it's unique, you know. But then the bands that really make a solid mark don't sound like every other band, you know. And then everyone's working on, well, we want you to be this type of band. And inevitably that kind of came back to bite those companies. And then, you know, something that, like, they used to call it offloading, where the labels or booking agents would sign up with a few bands that all basically had the same style, music, aesthetic, all that. And they would just kind of see which one paid out, and then whoever paid out the best, they'd drop all the other ones. And it was kind of like hedging their bet. Like, we know one of these styles of rock is going to work, but rather than keeping all of them and booking them together and making more of the profit because they'd be booking or working with all the bands that they would be able to market together, they would drop the slightly less marketable bands. And it's kind of like the, you know, repeat process over and over and over. And I kind of recognize that in a lot of businesses. But they're always profiting off of creativity. And then it sort of all falls apart because it boils back down to like all the decisions by committee. And that usually doesn't ever work out long term. All this is basically just started because I was talking about how I don't really like this company, but I like their products. How's it going in Turkey? Have you ever been to Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe? Well, either they're typing a long answer or they already dipped. Or maybe they didn't understand my question. What I was referring to is to what were considered, I guess, prehistoric sites that were found in the 90s that have megalithic structures that predate most things that were documented as the earliest megalithics. It's more of like my speed of what I'm interested in that I'm not professionally attached to, history and archaeology. Which I feel like has become sort of like a subject of a lot of podcasts now, which is sort of like a benefit for me, but a little bit frustrating. Because people only know like cursory, sort of surface level stuff about it. And there goes the crowd. See ya. Anybody see the Philly Karen situation? That one. I'm a big baseball fan as well, so I thought that was pretty entertaining. Felt happy for that kid that he got to get the autographed bat and all that stuff. I thought that was also a stand-up move from the Marlins team to make sure that the kid was not totally, you know, screwed over from that lady freaking out. But I feel like that's also a lot of why I quit going to games, was people like that. I used to work for a company that worked for the Astros during the controversial season 2017. So I was at a lot of those games. And I was at like all the ALCS, ALDS that year. So the Sox and the Yankees, and man, were those fans not nice. I have to say, some of the Phillies fans earlier in the season were also pretty horrible. Not to say that Astros fans are all class, but there's a little bit of a, like, don't make dad upset vibe when you're at an Astros game. Which, like, juxtaposition, if you go to a Rangers game, you don't have that for whatever reason, despite being in the same state. And both being teams that had Nolan Ryan. It's kind of baseball's dad for a while. Measure out something real quick. I'm truly ranting. Which that's something, as far as rambling goes, because, like it or not, that's what's happening while I draw. I was at the White Sox series where the Astros eventually got caught for the cheating. And my wife literally asked me what that banging noise was. I was like, I don't know. Maybe that's like people stomping together or something. So even being there, we went to 2 games in that series. One, we were at the first game with the White Sox, and we were up like kind of in the nosebleeds, like pretty far away. It was her first major league game. I grew up going to Astros games, but and then my cousin has a family member on his side that has season tickets right on third baseline. I mean, like, you're literally lower than the field level, so you're kind of eye line with the backs of at the time Alex Bregman's knees, which when you sit that far away, you are beyond where they used to have the net. So if a foul ball came over there, you got to be ready to catch. But we were there for the 3rd game of the White Sox series and heard it even more because we were down closer to the field, which was interesting. But one thing I will say, because I was at the ALCS, ALDS, and one of the series games, they may have cheated on batting, but you can't really cheat on pitching. And I watched Verlander throw his, for one, he pitched all 9 innings. This is when he was still on the Astros before he went back and then ended up out here in the Bay Area. I watched him pitch all 9 innings, and then his last 4 pitches were his fastest 4 pitches of the game, and it was something to see. I always tell people he wasn't cheating, so you can't hold it against him for all of that stuff. To be fair, that same year, the Red Sox and the Yankees both got caught cheating and sued the MLB to keep it private so they could settle it behind closed doors rather than admitting to it like the Astros did. So there is some class and failure there. And now I've truly chased everyone out of here. I don't care. But yeah, those were some good days. I remember my hands hurting like crazy because I high-fived so many strangers who will never win in those games. I basically had a job as like a photographer working for a photo booth company, a truly awful company. If you're curious, you can Google photo booth Houston, and they're awful. Like literally stiff people on pay and all kinds of horrible stuff. But the one thing I can say is when I worked for them, very briefly, it was all contract, like small gigs. I did get paid to go to all the Astros games, so that was nice, and I didn't have to pay for tickets. But yeah, I got to go see all that in person, so I can't complain too much. But that was when we were living in Houston, which is where I'm originally from. Bear with me one sec. So out of all the 11 people that are watching, does anybody need anything from the store? Just kidding. How come no one's talking? Language barrier, sounds off. I gotta say, today is one of those days where it's more about the discipline than it is about the enjoyment. No offense to anyone, but since I've been drawing for coming up on almost 30 days in a row, it is truly an exercise in discipline to keep doing it every day, because sometimes it doesn't feel fun. But like any practice that you're determined to continue to grow in, you gotta do it a lot. And I'd say realistically, out of the 28 some odd days that I've drawn at this time on a daily basis in a row, I've only felt that way like twice, and today's one of them, so that ain't too bad. Yesterday, actually not too far off from this time, my stream crashed, and I was kind of annoyed with that, but then when I came back on, it seemed like more people were popping up, so it ended up being a good thing. And apologies for the noise. For one, we have a church not too far that rings these bells at random times, and it's about that time of day when everyone starts cooking and slamming and turning water on, which affects the sound in my office. think in the future I'm going to set up some community guidelines on my chat stuff. I feel like I get a lot of drive-by nonsense where people announce something and then leave. Or like spam and bots. I feel like eventually I'm just going to have to start doing this in person again and go draw in public. Because as much as I've enjoyed the consistency and process of creating a little community on here, which I'll continue to do, it seems like more than anything there's a lot more negativity on tap, or just like nonsense. It's kind of disheartening. Thanks, Travis. Not sure if you can hear me, but appreciate that. And just to be clear, I wasn't saying anything against the folks who have been in here every day. I appreciate that's kind of the community I was looking for. But in terms of the community guidelines, I feel like I need to set up some stuff so it's less of the drive-by spam. Because I don't really have anyone to moderate these consistently. I kind of don't want to have to rely on anyone else for streaming. So it's a little hard to both engage and focus on this stuff sometimes. I think also just because, like I mentioned earlier, my neighbors trying to learn how to play guitar as well as piano, and is just up all the time, all through the night, all through the day. There's never really quiet time. It starts to wear on me where I'm feeling the real lack lack of control of noise in our place. So it makes me a little bit crabby about some stuff. See, said, heard you smash my phone to my ear. Got my phone set up front of the house, actually. Several people asked what I'm watching, so I told them first band is Hell City Truckers. Cool. Right on, thanks, man. Hell City Truckers, I don't know that one. I like that name, though. It reminds me, years ago, my wife and I were moving into a new place on the east side in Austin. This was before we had a kid. And it was like a house that had been separated into a bunch of apartments, like little kind of condo setups. And the landlord, like one of the greatest landlords I've ever had, spoke very well, but was still learning English and would apologize all the time because he would get stuff wrong. So he'd like often call me and ask about how to say something. Really sweet guy. And he kept telling me, oh, you know, the other people that live in the house, they're all musicians, so you might know them. And he told me that over and over, and then the day that I came over to start moving things in, the landlord was helping me move stuff, like that kind of a guy. Like I showed up and he showed up too and got a dolly out, and it's really cool. But he kept telling me, you'll know this, the guy who lives next door is in some band called like the Pig Bastards or something like that. And I told him, I was like, no, I'm in like a kind of like a Motown like rock band, so I don't know that we'd play with like biker bands. And then the neighbor stuck his head out of the door, and it was my friend Mark, who's the guitar player for the Heartless Bastards. And I was like, oh, okay, I gotcha. He had confused the names, but this whole time I was imagining we were about to live next to like a biker band. But yeah, Hell City Trucker sounds kind of like one of those names. But that was a pretty great house that we lived in. Free Google Fiber. We could all play music as loud as we wanted to because everyone sort of understood that's what we lived in, was music house. This is one of those moments when I wish that y'all could smell what I'm smelling. Somebody is making like a monstrous chicken noodle soup or something. I feel like someone opened a spice pack and threw it in my window. Like not bad, but not good. It's strong. I guess since I'm drawing Bernthal, I should talk about him a little bit. He's an actor that I mentioned I like every time he pops up in something. I like that he seems to want to be in his friends' projects so much that he accommodates smaller roles. A good example of that is Peanut Butter Falcon, because he was already close with Shia LaBeouf pre-cancellation. He plays his brother Mark in, I think, 2 scenes that might have a runtime of about 8 seconds. But knowing who he's talking about makes those stories hit harder when he's talking about disappointing someone. Which I think he kind of inhabits that same role in The Bear, because he's Mikey in The Bear. And I mentioned this yesterday, but I think some of my favorite episodes of that show I won't spoil anything, but one of them's called Seven Fishes, and the other one is called Forks. And Seven Fishes is kind of like the Mikey episode, and it makes that show hit a lot differently. And he's got a bigger role in that than he does in like Peanut Butter Falcon or anything like that. But it's one of those actors that I think a lot of people write off as like a tough guy or a jock, which he's definitely that. He was a minor league baseball player in Russia, but he's definitely an actor. I mean, he can play a tough guy because he is that, but he can also play just like a really flawed individual, and he's done it really well in a lot of things. He was great in Fury. I honestly, I didn't really watch The Punisher until really recently. I saw that he and Ebon Moss were both in that, and so I watched it when I kind of ran out of shows, and it was alright. I'm not really into that sort of like trauma action, but it was good for what it was, you know. I think those shows are kind of limited with being based on a comic book like that. There's not a ton of depth, so the real challenge is how much depth can they add to it, which I think they did a good job. But after a while I felt myself like hyper watching it, like skipping through scenes I didn't really feel attached to, which I know is like disrespectful to the project, but it just is what it is. The movie that I was referring to that I was watching earlier that had him in it, and I completely forgot he was in it, is Ford versus Ferrari, which I mentioned the other day. I think it's a great film. The place where it misses the mark, in my opinion, is the music. The score to it is not my favorite. And again, the score is music that's composed for the film, not the soundtrack, which is already written well-known songs to establish the genre and the era of the film, especially when they're historically based. But Bernthal plays Lee Iacocca, which is one of the marketing guys who was kind of famous for being in like the car business as a marketing genius. It's one of the few roles that he's in where he's not a tough guy. He's just sort of a guy that's trying to change the industry that he's in. And he's sort of the middleman between Leo Beebe, who was the sort of secondary head of Ford Motors at the time, and Carroll Shelby, which my father-in-law actually used to have a Shelby GT. Not the Mach 1, but the one that looks like Carroll Shelby's car. He had a blue one with white racing stripes. And he's a big Bob Seger fan, so his license plate said Night Moves, which I always thought was like, you know, what a cool move. Respect. But yeah, I was watching that before I hopped on the live stream. It's a movie that I like. It's one of those things where it kind of has that element of like, because, spoiler alert, it does have a sad ending, or it has sad elements to the ending is a better way to put it. I really like the most of the movie, but it's a tough repeated watch because it hits pretty hard. It's kind of like a behind the music type of vibe of a drama film where, you know, the first part's the fun part. There go the dishes. Just set those anywhere. And then, you know, the back half of the movie is the serious part, and then you get the back half is the serious part, and then, you know, there's going to be some hard-hitting sad stuff. It's kind of that feeling. Another one that's like that I've mentioned before is Benjamin Button. It's mostly a fun movie, but man, what a tragic story when you watch the whole thing. I mean, tragic in one way, it's kind of, it's just like an oddly realistic ending for like a far-fetched concept. The movie that I was talking about that he did with Tom Holland, where Tom Holland asked him to slap him so he could cry in a scene, is called Crusade, I think. It's basically like a Crusade era film. It's actually better than I think a lot of reviews gave it credit for. It's a long watch and not like it's a really atypical story. But I think sort of a clever device. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. We'll give you time to mute or stop listening. Really clever device is that obviously it's part of the Crusades, so there's a mixture of French and British actors and accents, and he's not so great with those accents, and so his character took a vow of silence. And I thought that was a good way to work around having kind of a guy that you need to be a brute, but might throw everyone off by having a bad accent. Which I respect that move. I would rather someone not have a lot of lines than have a bad accent for an entire film. Or just commit to not having an accent. I feel like that's kind of a lost art. Which always used to crack me up when people would say an actor had a bad accent, but then when you think about it, a lot of those movies where they had bad accents, no one would be speaking English anyway. It's a really common trope back in the day. I think something he does really well is also he's really good at playing unlikable, which is a good trick for an actor like that to have because he can turn it off and then be charming. He does that quite a bit in Fury. He's kind of the least likable member of the tank crew. But then when he needs to turn it off and be someone that you feel endeared to, it's actually pretty seamless. I think also he plays a little bit like Country Dumb, which for a guy from DC, he did pretty well. It's another movie I could talk about at length because I know quite a bit about the behind the scenes and where the origin of those stories came from. In general, that's I think because of my age and everything, that's an era of stuff, or an era of history that I know quite a bit about. Also just have read extensively about it. Gotta be honest, I'm probably not going to do a 3-hour session today like I have before. We're already about to be at an hour and a half. And some of the regulars, I know Travis is working a concert right now, so I appreciate the fact that he's even trying to be engaged. So I really appreciate that. But like I said, it's really about the commitment of just sticking with the discipline, which I've already kind of done, and we've got a rough sketch of Bernthal. So I'll give it a little longer and see how it goes, but especially because I didn't get to run today, I'm feeling really low energy. And I think I've heard my neighbor blow his nose like 9 times already, which if I can hear it, you can hear it, so it's one of those things. It doesn't necessarily make for the most charming sound. It's also a hot day in San Francisco, so I have to have the window open to keep fresh air. Because if you didn't know this, San Francisco doesn't have air conditioning anywhere. I think the only places they technically really have it prevalently is in libraries. They're legally obligated to keep it at a certain temperature because it's a free public space. So it makes for a noisy drawing night because the window has to be open. kind of my goal tonight is just to get it to the point where I don't need my reference to be next to it anymore, and then I can start building contour and depth. And we're just about there, so not too far off from that. Then I can sit with a little better posture and don't feel as grouchy. But I gotta tell you, for my age, which I'm not old, I'm just old enough. If I sleep wrong for a day, I'm messed up for 2 weeks. On the days when I don't get to run or do like a proper workout, I feel like I'm underwater all day. It really translates to having energy for drawing or not having energy for drawing. Which hopefully get some deep rest tonight, and I'll wake up and feel like running, because I really don't want to have a pulled muscle right before travel. Running lately has kind of been my happy place. Gotten to the point where I've been running over a 10K just about every time I run. No rest, no slowdowns, no breaks, just hit 6.2 miles and then speed up until I get to 6.5. And then usually get a pretty massive endorphin rush from that. Never really understood that because, I played high school sports and was athletic as a kid. I never really got the idea of runner's high. But I can tell you, if you can run, even at a slow pace, like 5.3 miles an hour, like a jog, do that for 15 minutes. And then just tell yourself, I'm going to start over that count and just do another 5 minutes. By the time you get to the end of that, you won't feel tired because you get a big endorphin rush. That's what people are talking about with a runner's high. You also don't want to sprint, you want to jog to get acclimated to it, then you slowly speed up. But if you're looking to lose weight or feel less depressed or any of that, get on a treadmill. It's easier on your knees than running outside on the street. And just do that slow jog. I really have to play games with keeping myself entertained while I do that. I'll have a podcast on with noise canceling headphones. And luckily the gym that I go to has a movie screen in it. And so I'll watch whatever they have on, even if it's garbage. And I'll listen to my podcast. And if I need extra reinforcement, there is a TV screen on the treadmill. And I will just kind of make a cocktail of distraction. And before I know it, I've run for an hour and 10 minutes. And I was a little surprised when I first started doing that. But now, on the days that I don't do that, I really feel like crap. I saw the new Peter McKinnon video today about his blackout EDC carry. I imagine if he really has all that stuff on him, because he's still one of the few guys that wears skinny jeans. Not few guys, but one of the few public figure guys. He's got to be his pockets are all bulging. What is he carrying all that in? Just the thought of having all that stuff on me drives me nuts. But I also wonder if he ever gets tired of being a stuff guy. all the things he needs all the time. And like, I feel like, I don't know, I'm riding the fence of am I enjoying this content, or I just watch it because I'm familiar with it. Because I can't really relate, despite the fact that every time I do something for a number of years, he seems to pop up doing it and makes it like something everyone starts to do. Which I'm not being big-headed about, that is truly what's happened. I was shooting film for years. I'd always wanted a Leica. Had always carried a daily journal and drawn. I've always carried like a nice pocket knife. I mean, it's pretty standard dude stuff, especially from Texas. But then it's become his whole personality. I've always worn a big hat because I'm bald and I'm from Texas. Now he has like a hat company he co-owns. Like, it seems like everything that has just naturally been part of my life is like part of his like videos and what is essential to him. But something that I can't really identify why I'm still watching is the stuff when it's videos in a 3-act structure, but he's really not telling you anything. It's just sort of this thing he's done for so long that it's like a standard of his videos. And then he kind of like postulates something in the end, like he might make a big life change, like a new office or a different truck or whatever. But I stop and wonder, and not that I'm comparable in any way other than the fact that I've done a lot of the same practices for years. Who is he talking to? Because he, in that video, just casually dropped that his daily carry camera is an $11,000 setup. Actually $15,000 because the lens he has on there. And then he's wearing a $2,500 watch. And not like a collector watch, just like a watch. It's just an expensive diver's watch for someone who doesn't dive. I wonder if he ever stops to think how unrelatable that is. You know, most people are watching those things trying to aspire to do that stuff, I think. It just makes me wonder. I mean, that said, like, I've liked a lot of his videos over the years. I still follow him. But half of the time I feel like I'm just sort of watching him to see what the next crazy thing is. But yeah, it's weird how often that's happened where I start, like, you know, it wasn't an easy thing for me to get, so I understand how unrelatable it is, but I started using a very specific Leica model. Then all of a sudden I see him posting a video that's his new daily carry. And then I've drawn every day for years, carried my pocket journal for years, and then he starts talking about all of his drawing tools. I've yet to see any drawings he's done. And it's just like collections of crap all the time. Like, he literally carries 2 pocket knives, and 10 pens, and a field notes book that's like too low of a page count that has light waxing on the pages, so who would want to draw on that anyway? It's just like a wild amount of stuff. And then I think not in price, but one of the least relatable things is that he carries a thing that helps his cards not get bent in his pocket for his magic tricks. But then carrying a deck of cards all of a sudden is like, well, that's pretty normal. I mean, I take them when I travel in case I want to play games or something, or do a couple little card tricks. But then he says that he's carrying a leather-coated metal case that has ostrich leather, and it's like $250 on that. It's just wild to me. I don't know, the life of excess. It's like excess is entertainment, I guess, which I guess has become more commonplace. I don't know, I'm kind of like more of the practice of get something and use it until it doesn't work anymore. Then repair it and use it more. I don't know, that's kind of like the whole thing of those guys, the Casey Neistats and the Peter McKinnons of the world. I mean, no knock on them. I respect that they've done what they've done, but I feel like I've like gotten suckered into watching those videos before, and then I realized by the end of it, I didn't gain anything from that. It was just them talking about something. And I'm not accidentally repeating myself. That is literally what they're doing. They're talking about something. And it's sort of become like the new like newscaster voice for YouTube videos. It's like the Peter McKinnon "What's Up" thing, and Casey Neistat's like sort of talk through everything. I don't know. It's like the lighting in the background for no reason to show their shelves, all that stuff. Which maybe I'll end up doing that. I have no idea. I've tried it before and felt like, nah, I can't do this. Maybe if I have a full studio set up for this and draw more live on camera, I'll end up having some greeting that I have to do or whatever. But I hope I never become a stuff guy. And what I mean by that is just like, it seems like so many of those people's personalities are attached to what they own and carry around. I also just feel like every time they sit down at like a coffee shop or a pub or something, they have to like unpack all the crap they brought with them. It's like, it must seem like quite the production. I think that's the longest I've gone without sharpening. Try to make this pencil last a bit longer. And get the fall off of the sides of his hair a little better, because it kind of falls off drastically, and then he's got a couple little things like that. And then bear with me, I'm going to move my reference so there's not as much of a reflection on it, because now I'm at the point where I don't need it directly next to me. I'll try to draw for a little bit longer just in case anyone jumps on. I also realize it's Saturday night, so people must be running to watch Saturday Night Live. Just kidding. The show has not been funny for a decade or two. Alright, one more second. Something else I thought was kind of funny. Sorry for all the shaking. My power cord's attached to this line. I saw that Bowen Yang, or whoever that is, got fired or quit Saturday Night Live, and then was comparing himself to Shane Gillis, saying the same thing happened to them. I think the main difference is that I've never heard of or thought any scenes were funny enough to remember who that guy is. Whereas I've seen a great deal of things that Shane Gillis has said or done that have been funny. It's like funny is funny, so it's like, it's kind of a bummer. Like, there's not really anywhere to look these days that isn't just like clickbait news and quotes taken out of context. I say this as somebody who still buys the San Francisco Chronicle, which I have to admit has turned into mostly garbage. I kind of just get the crossword puzzle out now. Get that, grab the horoscopes for my wife to read, kind of jokingly. Which actually, that's why this thing sits at so much of a bow. These are, let's see. That's what's in here. crossword puzzles and answers to them. So I don't have to go Google them. I don't cheat, just to be clear. I'm a fan of doing the crosswords kind of old school. I'll answer them, and then I'll go double check my answers to see what I got wrong, kind of grade myself on it. And then these brown bags are in here because I use those as scratch paper. Those are mostly from like the art store and stuff when I go buy pencils or different supplies. And then, there we go. Okay, sorry for the shaky. It's kind of got like an Arnold flat top in this, so I need to go and start adding all the little anomalies, little artifacts as I usually call them, Arnold facts. I'll try to draw for a little bit longer. Like I said, this is a practice in discipline, so even if I'm not feeling it or there's not much going on in the chat, I'll try to stick with it a bit. Definitely, like anybody else, have these moments of like really disheartening sort of trains of thought just about how hard it is to gain like any sort of traction when you're in the art world. I don't necessarily mean like on here like numbers, but I have these moments of like asking, why am I still doing this? But then I have a day where I remember like, oh yeah, I love doing this. You have to remind yourself that those days are more prevalent than the ones where you're questioning it. Which is true with anything really, with bad jobs, with any creative practice, music, art, painting, you know, pottery, working out. It's all kind of the same thing. It's like, what else are you gonna do, you know? I think it also probably didn't help. I was watching some live streams earlier, and it just seems like either there's more bots than people, or a lot of people just really, really are hopeless. That is disheartening to me. But like I said earlier, we live in San Francisco, and so a little stroll around the city, and you feel like that anyway. And I'm sure to some people's surprise, I'm not really referring to the homeless people. I'm referring to the sort of like culture-crushing, yuppie, puffy vest hedge fund people. I don't mean to sound mean about that, but I noticed like a lack of culture that's sort of infested the city here, and a lot of it is the art galleries have all kind of gone to crap. a lot of the restaurants are flipping tables to try to get more and more people in, even when they're not fully booked. There's sort of this like capitalist takeover here where a lot of what made San Francisco what it is, what it was really, a lot of that culture is gone, and it's like this giant like real estate grab by those people I'm referring to. If you haven't been here, I'm sure that's hard to relate with, but if you ever visit, if you walk around most of the neighborhoods, you'll know what I'm talking about right away. It's like an overabundance of people having conversations like on speakerphone, out loud, incredibly loud compared to just anyone else living, and it's always about real estate or finance. It's like tech. The whole city's turned into those people. And I mean this in a sweet way. It used to be a city filled with weirdos, you know? It wasn't uncommon to be out getting a beer and somebody just walks by in a loincloth and it's like, oh yeah, they're probably going down to this bar. Not that I want that as my view, but it was just sort of like normal place to have like weirdos, you know? Like in North Beach, you still get like the people that have been there their whole lives, and there's still some of that culture, and people that have, you know, ring on every finger and a waist-length beard and all that, but then you have all the people that kind of take over the cafes, loudly talking about real estate and tech. It just makes me wonder, like, was their intention to move in here and then slowly just eat away at the culture? It's kind of the same. I mean, it's like that in most places. Like Austin's gentrification of the east side is a prime example of that. If you're familiar with Austin sort of landscape and businesses, Liz Lambert is somebody that I think used to be kind of a local hero or whatever. She has like a very famous steakhouse and owns like a cool hotel and all that. She kind of started buying up stuff and owns like some of the TP yurt cities and Marfa and all that. And then when you start to see like the crowds that attracts and what businesses that they pushed out to do all that, you realize like, oh, they're recreating the culture to make it like a kitschy sales thing. And the clientele that attracts is usually pretty awful. Surprise, surprise. But I'm sure it's like that in some way in most places. I think that the real difference in San Francisco is that for the most part we have like the best renters' rights laws in the whole country. So you get people that have had the same rent, you know, give or take a few percentages for the last like 50 years. So they're able to retire here and have somewhat of a normal life without everything being astronomically expensive for like their living situation. But then cost of living for groceries and everything like that here is so high that it kind of becomes sort of redundant, where it's like, oh well, rent control's helping, but everything else has skyrocketed so much. And it runs all the people who provide the culture out, which I'm sure a lot of people don't realize what that means, but culture is what everyone dips into when they're done with work. Whether it's a book or music or art or a TV show or any of that, that's all creative weirdos. So when people think it's less necessary, they don't realize that that's kind of what drives society to have interests and, you know, escapism and all the things that are required for how we live now. But I don't know. I'm not the only one that feels this way. There's a lot of creatives that are on the same tip, like sort of wondering what the next step is, you know. It was very much like this in the music industry as well. Like, they're pretty directly related. I mean, Austin is a great example of that. The neighborhood I originally lived in with my wife was in South Austin, and we had a house that was like 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-story, concrete floors, like stained concrete, great area, walking distance from a ton of stuff, and it was $1,000 a month. Had a whole yard, like a fenced-in yard for a dog. And that house got repainted. They redid the yard like a tiny bit, didn't update anything else, and it's 3,800 now. You know, it's a city that's supposed to be the live music capital of the world, but I hope that real estate and bankers are good at playing music, because it no longer is going to be that, you know. Like, there's the whole comedy boom there, but comedians make less than musicians, if people don't know. A good night is $25 to $50, unless you're famous or successful, and you have to do that for 10 years before you get it. Because for most of my friends that weren't musicians were comedians. That's another thing, is that a lot of those people, you know, they'll do that their whole lives, and they'll get well into their 40s and 50s still chasing that dream, and they have to have roommates at that age. Because like the secondary tech boom and everyone moved to Austin, it's kind of the same problem there, except you're in Texas, so you have like the reality of what that place is kind of butting up against everyone's sort of California takeover of Texas. But all that said, if you look at rental prices around San Francisco right now, it's all just about doubled or tripled for rentals mostly. I don't really look at sales, because I would never own in California, but it's one of those things where they're leading the nation and returning to the office, and all the tech people are coming back here, and so now is kind of reflecting in other markets where they all bailed to during the pandemic. You see this shift in culture, because now all these people are renting out the places that they bought at a skyrocketed price, and they're expecting creative people like in Austin to take those houses. But those people all got pushed out when they moved there in the first place. Like, the best way I could really explain that, like, simply, is like, imagine if you're floating on the surface of a pool, and then a 1,000-pound person jumps in, and they occupy the displacement of that water, and then you're thrown out of the surface, and then you're forced to look for another pool. So it's just kind of like a nice, cool. Not sure if you can hear me, Travis, but cool. Thumbs up. The whole idea behind that is that culture is what they sold everyone about Austin. The food, the music, the comedy, all that stuff. And everyone moves there. And now that culture becomes less important. There's a documentary a guy that I know made about it called Ecotone. They started building condo buildings at the foot of a bunch of historic venues, and then systematically shut down most of those venues, which has affected places like Stubbs. When I first lived in Austin years and years ago, Stubbs, they'd play till 2 in the morning there. You could have a show, and it would start after dark, so it wasn't too hot. And then they'd go late, but then they built a literal condo tower at the foot, the very next property over at the foot of Stubbs. If you have a condo there, your balcony faces the stage, so you get tons of free shows whether you like it or not. Then they scooted the sound curfew for that earlier and earlier, so now what you get when you play at Stubbs is 10 to 20 people passing out in the crowd 9 months out of the year, because they are heat stroking and drinking, because everyone has to be done by like 10 p.m. instead of 2 a.m. So it's the direct result of moving a bunch of people into a the city center, selling them on the culture that you get there, but then people who live there don't want to hear a concert 7 nights a week. So that documentary was called Ecotone. Same thing happened with a bunch of places like La Zona Rosa and a lot of venues, Red Eyed Fly. Not that I loved all those venues, but it's what happened to them. And then, like Cheer Up Charlie's is another one in Austin that was pretty, like, I'll just say this, not my crowd if you know the reference. But they were an East Side staple. They had a bunch of food trucks that a lot of my friends kind of frequented because it was down the street from Hotel Vegas and Volstead and the Elephant Room and all the places that we hung out around the corner from Horseshoe and, all the good spots. But they got pushed out of their lease there and then moved across the street basically and took over Club de Ville, what was across the street from Stubbs for years and years and years. And I think the last I heard, they're going to get pushed out of that space as well. And it's just kind of one of those things where they sold everyone on the culture of Austin. And ultimately, comedy is the more beneficial thing because it's not as loud as live music. So like venues like Holy Mountain disappeared, which I think is now the Creek and the Cave. And Holy Mountain was a great venue. Good sound, good stage, great bar. Had enough space in the back area to have a big South by show every year. But for culture, in terms of people getting condos and apartments and all that, comedy's better because it doesn't have the echo tone that bounces in between the buildings when bands play. So then ultimately you get the spread of everything where like all the musicians have to move to the outskirts, like Lockhart, which I have some friends out there, and let me tell you, it's a shithole. Sorry, earmuffs, but it's nice when there's chilly weather, and it's nice when there's some people around, but for the most part, everyone has to either have a second house or drive into Austin all the time to do anything. There's no food or culture out there except for the people that brought their tiny businesses out there from Austin who all still have to go work in Austin all the time. And I think everyone's under the impression that that's going to be some oasis in the future. But I grew up around small town Texas, and it ain't no oasis. You still have all the locals who are born and raised there, and they don't want all of that there for the most part. But that's the result of a town being sold on the idea of having all this culture and history, and a lot of that was weirdos. It's Willie Nelson saying, hey, all the rednecks and hippies get along here, like we should just play a bunch here. But even that said, Willie's big party doesn't happen in Austin proper. If you look at that, you might fly into Austin, but you still got to drive a ways. I'm not blaming him at all, but it's kind of going back to what I was saying about everything with the culture, the lack thereof in San Francisco. It's kind of all shifting again because all the tech yuppies are coming back. Which years ago I was saying this would happen. They'd live in Texas for a few summers and then they'd realize, oh, the power outages are hell. You gotta drive everywhere and you gotta park when you get there. They're not used to that kind of stuff. But you also have to be around Texans, which I'm proud to be a Texan in the sense that I liked it when I lived there for the most part. Just get tired of the heat. Get tired of not being able to walk somewhere. The way I explain that to people is if you're in Europe or anywhere where you have a walking culture. The few times that I chose to walk somewhere in Texas, if somebody spotted me that knew me, they'd pull over and say, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm just walking out the store. Like, did your car break down? No, I'm just trying to walk. That's kind of how it is. It's not really a walking culture unless you live downtown, which if you live downtown, good luck, carry pepper spray. But a lot of that is the impact of so many people marketing the culture of the live music. And then years and years ago, like 2000, let's see, probably 2009, there was a Forbes article talking about how 167 people moved to Austin every single day for a year. That was the average. And that's 2009. That's a long time ago. And we felt it then. It was everyone was having to move to North Austin and be 40 minutes from downtown where we all played shows. And then, of course, there's the festival culture, which takes over the city multiple times a year. And then you have to deal with all the drunk drivers because everyone thinks that it's cool to party and drive. And then, grocery stores are slammed, traffic is worse. Just kind of one of those things, but it's because of all the business that they get out of that. So it's, there's good and bad from it. Like there's friends of mine that were bartenders and they build their whole year around working through the festival season, then they'd take 3 months off and go travel. That was cool for them, but then everything turned into like, well, why travel here? Why don't you just move here? That culture doesn't last every day. You don't want to be at ACL and South by every single day of your life. And I think a lot of people thought that's what it would be, and then those same people were the ones that started complaining about noise from music venues 7 days a week. But I'm one of the few that's old enough to remember what it used to be like. Not complaining about that aspect of it, but I don't know. It's kind of like, for lack of better terms, where there are yuppies and tech bros, you get a void in culture because they have to force people out to be able to make space for them. And that's both in real estate and pricing. So if you just joined, economics brought to you by me. Just kidding. But this all came about because I was talking about like sort of a lack of culture and things that are sort of slowly disappearing from San Francisco, and how I saw that happen in Austin, and how the two cities are kind of interconnected in that way because they're both tech cities. And I'm not anti-tech. I'm, like happy to say I've had a lot of friends who worked at Apple. I've had a lot of like family that's worked there. Like even pre-Tim Cook, So it's not that I'm anti-tech, it's sort of the culture that it brings with it. Like Apple, I actually worked there very briefly, and they're not really like tech bro culture there, or they weren't back then. I literally got my hands tattooed during training, and my trainer and my boss were like, that's cool. Like they thought, they were psyched. They wanted to show people because I have Doctor Who tattoos, and they thought it was fun. So it's not necessarily that I'm talking about, it's sort of the loud bro culture that doesn't necessarily appreciate art until they get a little older, or maybe they never do. But it sort of like eats the culture out of cities in a way where it makes it harder to bounce back. I just saw a big dip in numbers, so maybe there's some bros that were watching. Not anti-bro either. I grew up mostly in West Texas, playing sports and stuff. So the bros are my bros, but it's hard. It's one of those things. You have to be able to live to do it. If you don't want to live in the middle of nowhere and be uninspired, you gotta find a way for the things to coexist. But the culture here is expensive, is a way of putting it. Like it's, I don't know. I've talked about this a lot, but the gallery culture here, if it's not specifically for the wealthy, then it's specifically for identity politics. And it's kind of a lack in merit and more of like geared towards money, or being like unchallenged in terms of like identity politics stuff. which I get it, we're in San Francisco, there's going to be that here. We just hit the 2-hour mark about a minute ago, so I'm going to finish some of the shading here, and then I'm probably going to take off before I would normally do. I've kind of averaged 3 hours on each one of these drawings, but I don't want a negative rant about lacks of culture too much. And like I said earlier, I didn't get a run in today, so I feel pretty low energy, and I'm pretty pleased with how long I've been drawing anyway. While I'm pretty big on like staying positive or at least neutral, there are going to be those days where it's like that. And like I said, out of the 28 some odd days that I've been drawing in a row at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, like that little plug there in the middle of a rant, I think there's only been like 2, maybe 3 days where I've felt low energy in terms of not being like really amped to draw. And this is one of them, so full disclosure, art is like that sometimes. Everything's like that sometimes. Like the Danny Rojas of art. Art is life. I'm allowed to do that accent. So although it looks like I'm doing vertical lines, I'm actually doing really tight circles. This is 150 GSM paper. Oh, our upstairs neighbor is cooking. Hang on. That neighbor is seems to be challenged about like cooking and his music skills and everything. It's like either a space cadet or just kind of bad at everything. Smoke detector every single day. Maybe he doesn't clean his pants. Anyway, I'm doing tight circles because on 150 GSM paper, it emulates pores, which for high definition photos, you're going to see some pores. But no joke, that guy does burn his food or something every day. We hear the smoke alarm go off, then we hear him drag a chair over to it, and then we hear him slam around, and then 20 minutes later it happens again. Okay, window open again. If it feels like I'm less upbeat than normal, I am less upbeat than normal today, which is a real representation of how I'm feeling, because I'm not really putting on a show, I'm just drawing. You're sitting with me drawing, or whatever you're doing. But I think it's also important to speak to these things sometimes, like the stuff that's kind of robbing the city of culture. I'm in the city on a daily basis, and I see it all, you know, and it does affect artists, and it affects people that appreciate having some culture attached to their city. But yeah, all that said, I'm pretty burnt out on San Francisco, which I never thought I'd say. Like, I love the weather, and I love the scenery, but man, the people are something else. That's one thing, if you can hear that. That's my neighbor yet again blowing his nose loudly. There's like no separation when you live in a city like this. You hear everything. Which, like, whatever, but, you know, we all make our noise. It's life. But if you value, like, quiet and peace of mind, you can't really live here, you know? Which, this is our second apartment in the city. It's a big apartment, but it comes with all its issues being in an old building. And that's one of the issues, is you can just hear everything. Which, like, the upstairs neighbor is the one that's tragically learning Oasis at 3 a.m. Playing Wonderwall, or trying to. And I can hear him like he's sitting in our bathroom while I'm trying to sleep, you know, it's pretty loud. Which, like, no knock on people learning music, but do it in the daytime, you know, or do it where no one can hear you. Not at 3 in the morning with your windows open. Do I only draw real people or some fiction? I pretty much draw photoreal portraits. So sometimes, if you mean fiction, I draw actors portraying characters in movies. Like this week I drew Cliff Booth, which is Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I've drawn Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York. So that, in a sense, is fiction, but it is also Brad Pitt or Daniel Day-Lewis. Most of the time, because I'm drawing from a photo reference, so it requires having a high definition photo. pretty much just ran out of gas in terms of rambling. If you're wondering why I'm not talking anymore. I'm just trying to get this to a good stopping point, and then, as per usual, like I've done for the last 28 days or so, I will be back on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow, and I'll probably draw for 2 or 3 hours tomorrow as well. And then a lot of the time with the hair, I've mentioned this a lot, but if anyone's watching that doesn't watch these normally, I try not to do any block shading in hair because the lights that I use and graphite tend to create a reflective image. So really, for the sake of people watching, unless I sell it later on, which all these are for sale, the originals and prints, I tend to keep the hair at a more medium tone and do most of the shading individually rather than big like swatches of it. Just so you're able to see a little bit more of the detail before it gets reflective from the graphite dust. Just gonna doctor up the shape of his hairline. He's got kind of an odd hairline. It's sort of funny. I think it's almost like a frown shape. All right. I'm going to call it there for the night. I'll be back on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow, which is 5 p.m. in California. I think this is day 28. We're in the high 20s now of that many days drawing in a row at the same time. If you want to see more drawing, I'm going to be live streaming every day for an unforeseeable amount of time. It will change in terms of what time I go live in about a little more than a week, but I'll still try to go live as I travel. If you don't have the patience to watch 2 or 3 hours of drawing, then I do time lapses that range from 10 seconds to 3 minutes to show the full process, so you can kind of follow along. I'm always happy to answer art questions or other questions, so long as they're nice. I will be back on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. All right, thanks for watching.